Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the first presentation for March. My name is Laura Goldman. I am the registered dietitian working with Premier Weight Loss to provide you these presentations. And tonight's topic is in regards to hydration and a bit more than that, electrolytes. So we've got the electrolytes, hydration, and GLP-1s, how to prevent fatigue, dizziness, and dehydration. And even though we're talking about fluids and items that aren't very high in calories, I still want to focus on our weekly mantra, which is remember, it is the quality of your calories that matters. And so it is also important to have good quality fluids and good quality methods of hydrating yourself. And so we will be touching on those this evening. Briefly, what we'll cover this evening is to talk about how GLP-1 medications may impact your thirst, why hydration can be so important, a brief explanation of electrolytes and what they do, what they are. I'll try to give some real-world examples or some strategies to stay hydrated beyond just drinking water. And I have a couple challenges that you can try out for this week. As always, at the end, I like to leave time for any questions that you may have as well. First and foremost, talking about GLP-1s and our thirst or your fluid intake. Interestingly enough, it is possible that GLP-1 medications can decrease our thirst response. As you know, GLP-1s act on receptors in your brain that influence your appetite. Most of these are found in the hypothalamus, but these receptors also can have an influence on our thirst, as well as the satiety or urge to eat. And so since these are acting on those receptors, it can have a dampening effect of that. Also, if you have that lower appetite, then chances are your food intake will be lower. And surprisingly, or maybe not so much, some of our foods can make up a big portion of our daily fluid intake, up to 20 to 30%. And that comes in the forms of the fluid and that we get from fruits, some vegetables, as well as soups. So if something flows or is liquid at room temperature, that can count toward a fluid in your body. So if you're eating less, then chances are you're getting less through that method as well. And last but not least, if you're experiencing any GI side effects, nausea, or maybe vomiting, or potentially diarrhea, then there could be some water loss or just even less intake because food is less appealing altogether. So all of these factors can make it difficult to stay adequately hydrated. And this may seem a bit obvious, but I still wanted to focus specifically on why it is so important to maintain our hydration. First and foremost, we may become dehydrated not only from the lack of fluid intake, like I mentioned on the first slide, but when there is rapid weight loss, there is this risk of some dehydration and electrolyte shifts because we can also have some water loss during this. If you are eating few calories and certainly very few carbohydrates, there's a possibility of ketone formation. So sometimes when people try to do the keto diet, this is what they're looking for. But sometimes we can inadvertently put ourselves into ketosis. And when we do that, yes, we are converting some of our fat into that energy, and that's what people aim for, but there's also a significant amount of water weight that can be lost through that. Also, people tend to have lower glycogen stores in their muscles or liver, and glycogen holds on to water as well. So there may be a decrease in water weight and a loss of extra fluids at that time. With that rapid loss of fluids and potential inadequate intake of fluids, that level of dehydration can actually put us at risk for what's called acute kidney injury. And we want to make sure that we can take care of our kidneys as much as possible. So we want to avoid that. Sometimes people can end up on dialysis when they damage their kidneys enough. So it's very important to avoid all of that and make sure that we're staying hydrated and staying healthy. So now that we've touched on hydration, there is a component to hydration where we've heard called electrolytes. And I'm sure you've heard the term and perhaps you know about it. A lot of us just see types of beverages, sports beverages in particular, that say contains electrolytes. But let's talk a little more about what they are. So first of all, they are essential minerals, and essential means that our body does need them to function. And quite literally, they have an electrical charge when they're dissolved in water. Some examples of electrolytes that our body uses are sodium, potassium, magnesium, calcium, and phosphorus, as well as chloride. And they're responsible for a lot of the nerve signaling in our bodies, as well as items that require some electrical impulses. So our muscle movements, our heartbeat, but also our fluid balance in terms of the fluids within our cells and outside of our cells, as well as our pH balance, which is very tightly controlled within our body. I also did want to mention some signs of electrolyte imbalance, but I did put this little asterisk at the end here because these signs that I list, muscle weakness, cramps, dizziness, fatigue, or headaches, those are signs of an imbalance, but be aware that these aren't just necessarily a sign of imbalance. So if you're experiencing this, but feel like you're adequately hydrated, it's very important to also speak with your doctor or provider about this because it could also be a sign of something else, and I don't want that to necessarily be ignored. But do keep this in mind. Now, where can we find electrolytes? Thankfully, in a balanced diet, we can typically find them easily in the foods that we eat. And so I did give a few examples here. Potassium, many people think of bananas immediately, but there are many, many other potassium-containing foods. Our citrus fruits, coconut or avocado, as well as a few types of vegetables, and also in dairy products you can find potassium. Sodium is pretty obvious, but I wanted to list it here. So if we're not just using the salt shaker, we can find it in our broths and soups, as well as some of those salty snacks. Magnesium can be found very easily in some of our pumpkin seeds and other nuts, whole grains, et cetera, et cetera. And then chloride, since sodium is usually in the form, or table salt is usually in the form of sodium chloride, you can find it in table salt as well as in seaweed and in tomatoes or olives. So I wanted to make sure that you had that list readily available. But you may ask, since we do see it advertised frequently, what about electrolyte drinks? Typically, if you are having a balanced diet, it's not usually necessary for you to drink an electrolyte beverage. And I think it's very important to mention that many of the standard electrolyte beverages can be quite high in sugar, which are oftentimes unnecessary with a few exceptions. And also there are one electrolyte beverage or powder in particular, Element, can actually have 1,000 milligrams of sodium per serving. And for many people, that's not needed. Now, there are exceptions to this rule. So strenuous exercise, if you know you're exercising more than 1 to 2 hours, or if you have excess fluid loss from a GI illness, as well as certain medical conditions or medications that may cause electrolyte and fluid loss, then those are some exceptions where electrolyte drinks may be helpful or even needed. If you are just wanting to drink these beverages because you like the flavor, then it's very important to look for the low or no sugar options. And also aim for those that contain a moderate amount of sodium and potassium. So somewhere around the 100, maybe up to 300 milligrams. But I would try and advise to stay away from the 1,000 milligram, again, unless necessary. Since I mentioned the exceptions, if you are needing to rehydrate because of excess fluid loss or illness, then having some sugar in your electrolyte drink is important. And so you want to aim for sort of a ratio or quantity where it would come out to about 6 grams of sugar and 300 milligrams of sodium per 8-ounce serving. And again, if you want to drink something like an electrolyte containing beverage for enjoyment, I did want to offer this do-it-yourself or homemade type of electrolyte drink that can give you adequate hydration. It can give you some flavor, but you can see based on the nutrition facts here that it's not too excessive in sodium, not too excessive in potassium, and the sugars in here are naturally occurring sugars that you're getting from the watermelon beverage itself. Feel free to take a screenshot of this recipe. It looks delicious to me and very refreshing. So I want to make sure that you can have this available. And if this is a style of some type of beverage you are interested in, please let myself or the Premier Weight Loss staff know, because I can get this and some other do-it-yourself, make-at-home electrolyte beverages out to you. And with all this talk of fluid and electrolytes, you may want to know how much you actually need to get in per day. The general goal is listed by most people as 64 ounces a day, or some people might say 8 cups a day. But like I said, you can get 20 to 30% of your fluids from your food, depending on which ones you choose. So sometimes the 8 cups can seem a bit misleading, because then you might think it has to all be drank. Also, your needs may be different based on your level of activity or your general body size. So again, you can always check in with your provider. However, you can also check yourself to see if you're adequately hydrated by checking the color of your urine. If it is a pale yellow or almost clear color, you can be fairly confident that you are adequately hydrated. And then I did want to give you a few signs of dehydration. So if your urine is dark colored, if you feel like you have a very dry mouth, are dealing with more fatigue or dizziness, or not urinating as frequently as you are used to, those can be a sign of dehydration. I also wanted to give you some strategies on staying hydrated. First and foremost, don't rely on feeling thirsty. Remember, with the GLP-1 medications, you may not have that thirst response be as strong. And so it's better to schedule your fluid intake. I called it here habit stacking, because if you have a certain type of rhythm to your day, then making sure, say if in the morning, the first thing you do is put on a pot of coffee, well, as you're letting the coffee brew, drink maybe half a cup to a cup of water, or whatever you're most comfortable with. Schedule in those sips throughout the day. Secondly, try and focus on those electrolyte-rich foods with your meals and snacks. I know I listed them out earlier, and again, I'm happy to give you that list if you need it, because then that can help you just sort of focus in on those a few times a day. Third is to focus on foods that already have a high water content. Foods like cucumbers, watermelon, those citrus foods, or soups are all really good options, because they're not overly filling, but they're also giving you a decent amount of hydration with their servings. And finally, you want to try and limit excessive intake of your caffeine, and also limit your alcohol intake. Caffeine by itself in moderate amounts doesn't seem to be too dehydrating or having too much of a diuretic effect, but it does seem to be in higher quantities to have that effect, so keep that in mind. If you're just having 1 cup of coffee in the morning, that should be okay. Alcohol, as you know, can have a diuretic effect, and so it's very important to keep that in mind as well. And we're already at the challenges for this week. So challenge number 1 is to schedule your sips. As I mentioned, it's best to try and set those reminders so that you are reminded to take a drink versus responding to the I'm thirsty signals by your body. I should also mention that as we get older, as we age, our thirst response is also not quite as strong as when we are in our youth. So that is also another factor that could be impacting us there. And then challenge number 2 is to try and add an electrolyte-rich food to your day. So if you like something like pumpkin seeds or a banana, avocado slices, try and add that in with your meal or snack so that you can give that a shot. Or like that watermelon drink recipe I had earlier on, you can try that out and see if one, even if you don't need extra electrolytes, it can be just a fun little add to give you some variety in your week. So I'd be very interested to see if anyone tries that out. So to quickly rehash, just remember that GLP-1 medications can affect your thirst. And so it's very important to be mindful of your fluid intake. Remember that fluid loss can lead to those imbalances in electrolytes. And so it's very important to also keep an eye on that and make sure that a balanced diet, even in small quantities, is a focus, because getting that with adequate fluids can really help avoid any complications of dehydration or imbalance. And as always, just check in with yourself, your daily habits, see if there's any changes, small sustainable changes that you can make to your daily routine to try and make this maybe not as, make this more of an afterthought because it's just coming to you naturally versus something that we have to consciously be concerned with. And now is the time that I like to leave it open for questions. So feel free to hit that question button at the bottom left hand of your screen. All right. Well, thank you everyone for attending. I hope you found this insightful and informative. And if you do have any questions about this or any other nutrition related topic, by all means, please reach out to the Premier Weight Loss staff and they can get you in touch with me. I hope you have a lovely evening and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye.